Welcome back to the Expect Chaos podcast. We have no idea what episode we're on.
I think this might be episode 9.
Episode 9. So we are 9 episodes in. If you didn't already, we had Andy Amsler on our last episode, and Andy was fantastic. He went through his thoughts on how to get strategically unstuck. And then we talked a little bit about the nuts and bolts of authentic communication and specifically in a political context. So if you haven't checked that episode out, it has broad applicability across many domains. So thank you to Andy.
Thank you so much, Andy. It was so fun to catch up. I actually met Andy on a campaign back in the aughts. And it's just fun to see where people end up and to be able to stay in touch with people and watch the evolution of their career. And he's doing really incredible things and very needed things given the state of the world right now. So definitely check out that episode.
Yep. Check out the episode. You can check him out on LinkedIn as well. Check out his website, which we put in the show notes of last week's episode. And he also started a Substack that details or is documenting his move to Malta.
I know we always whenever people ask us where Andy moved, I'm like, good Lord. But yeah, it's a really interesting perspective.
So worth a read. So head over to his Substack as well. There's some really interesting stories he's telling over there about his move to Malta and what that's like. Anyway, that's enough of that preamble today. So again, thank you to Andy for coming on. Today we have another episode with just the two of us, but today we're talking about.
Oh my gosh, our dog is in full assault mode today. All of our meetings, every conversation, she has aggressively snooted in and or climbed on top of us. For those that are watching on YouTube or Substack, you will see Emmy aggressively butt into frame.
She kind of bit my thumb, which is why I lost my train of thought.
Oh my goodness.
So she's like, oh, hey, what's going on?
Hey, what's happening? What's going on?
All right. So before I was so rudely interrupted. So today we are talking about a little bit about this concept of communication. So every now and then on these episodes, we'll talk about stuff that we encounter in our careers, and hopefully it's useful for listeners to consider. But today we're talking about a little concept called showing the receipts, from a communication perspective.
Yeah, and just also authorship. Mm-hmm. What is the story that you're actually authoring? So like Matt said, we wanted to start talking about this idea of, which we actually heard from another creator, which we'll link in the show notes. So that was a really cool way of, she talked about, or they talked about, I'm not sure, the idea of showing the receipts. And this is definitely something that we both fall into, this idea that, well, let's just let our work speak for itself. Mm-hmm. Like you don't necessarily need to have, like we told people what we're doing and then we did the work. So what else is there to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. I always say this, like it's easy enough to dispense medicine, harder to take your own medicine. So I think we've both, in the interest of full transparency, have had those challenges over the years of talking about the things that we do. And I think part of it, and this goes to what we see both in our clients and in ourselves, is that, we have this sort of aspirational story that we like to tell ourselves about the things that we're doing. And that's a good thing, because I think it helps us organize our thoughts and motivate ourselves. However, that story is not always so obvious to the people watching from the outside. And, I think because we are living our lives 100% of the time, we are obviously paying attention to it, right? And that inner story that we're telling ourselves, whereas other people who are observing from the outside, they tend to not see that because they're living their own lives, right? They're living their own stories. So the question that we're trying to answer today a little bit is, how do you communicate all of the work and things that you are doing as a leader and communicate that to people who are observing from the outside? Because again, we have this sort of running dialogue in our own heads, running narratives about what we're up to. Again, we're living our lives 100% of the time. They're not living our lives, they're living their own lives. So what can we do to more clearly communicate these types of things to people who need to hear it?
Yeah, absolutely. So One of the first areas is this idea of like aspiration versus action. So we talk with clients a lot about what story are you trying to tell? And that's a lot of the work we do with people, is to uncover and support their efforts to, whether it's a specific business or a person that we're working with, what story are you trying to tell? And it is often the case, as Matt said, and we don't want to, we're not calling other people out, we're calling ourselves out or in as well. The story that you think you're telling versus the story that your actions are telling. And often there's a gap between those two things. And so the idea of aspirationally, we're trying to be a company that is transparent. We're trying to be a company that puts customers first. We're trying to be, so on and so forth. Those are great and they sound great and they look great on a website or, social media platforms. But then as we're having conversations with people, we realize that those are just words, and the actual actions that are being taken are telling a different story. And I mean, the reality is, if your actions are telling a different story, you are not telling the story you think you are. I mean, that is not what people are taking away from, again, a company, a person, a speech, whatever it is that we're talking about.
Absolutely, because we're filling the gaps in our head. Right. So the actions, the difference, the delta between action and what's going on in our own heads, oftentimes we're filling in those details, and we take for granted the fact that folks outside of us, ourselves, they don't know automatically what that's about. And I can tell a story that about a client that we had a long time ago where they were trying to build out this product that it was a software product. I mean, I won't get too far into the details, but the founder was an engineer, and engineers and scientists are really interesting people. They are very, very smart, and oftentimes, and again, like all of us, I can kind of live in their heads sometimes. So what we were trying to do is figure out how to tell the story of this product, which was, according to our research, right? We were doing a ton of market research, trying to figure out if the market is essentially was ready for this product, number one, and number two, understood or could understand what it was, or what the aspiration was to be. So what ended up happening, though, is the product and the founder kept going through these different iterations of this product and never fully described what the thought process was behind new iterations of this product. So the rest of the team that was trying to sell it, essentially, and present it to the marketplace, they didn't really know what to talk about because they weren't sure what they were talking about. They had a sense of what it started or was supposed to start as, and didn't have a sense of where it was going. So this posed an enormous challenge. And I think the cool thing about storytelling, like trying to fill in those gaps, is you come in and you start trying to craft a story around it. So I mean, we talk about this a lot. Like, I think we're brought into situations where people feel like we're trying to solve a communications problem, and that is partially true. However, the storytelling often reveals these strategic gaps that exist, or these gaps in the plan or the product or the enterprise that would not have been visible previously. So we started the process of trying to tell the story, and as we were going through this, the founder then had to fill in those gaps for us about his thought process on why he was iterating in the way that he was, and then soon enough, that's combined with the market research, started to inform the product management, right? The development of the actual product. So it's not just a communications problem, it's a broader strategic issue, and that storytelling process helps, I think, pull that out of people who, again, and I live in my own head, right, too, like very much so. Having started, a strategic communications firm, which this is all very funny for someone. Again, we like to dispense the medicine, don't like to take it very much, but I started out as a solo act, right? And so it's just whatever is going on between your ears on any given day is the business. And then all of a sudden you start adding people into the team and you start dealing with a broader pool of clients. Suddenly you have to figure out how to communicate to people what you're doing, what your thought process is. Otherwise you sort of are just head down and moving through it. So moving from that kind of environment to dealing with other people is definitely an eye-opening experience, and something that has informed, I think, a lot of our work, going forward with others.
Yeah, and to let kind of everyone off the hook, and we've talked about this before, the fact that people go, I had this idea and then blah, 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 blah. Look at me. Now I'm a giant success. That desire to have an easily packaged, we went from A to B, which is never anyone's story. I mean, when you actually have conversations with people, there is so much that happens between when one has an idea for a product, a company, a personal evolution, whatever it is, the journey of where you started and where you ended up is almost never linear. But I do think there's so much pressure to package it in a very clean, simple, digestible format that it almost forces people to sand the edges to the point that they've actually obliterated the edges. It's not that they're even polishing. It's like, oh, well, you're not allowed to have an edge. You have to be, I did this and then boom, look at me. Now I'm super successful. And maybe that is some people's journeys, but more often than not, it isn't people's journeys, but they feel like, oh, well, I can't tell the part that I doubted, or I can't tell the part where I failed a bunch of times, or I can't tell the part where I almost quit and then almost quit again and then almost quit. And so there's just not as much language or as many examples of people talking about the entire process that I do think it pushes people to be just like a little teeny, like just make it really clean and easy and simple.
Well, the problem with that, again, is if you're working with a team in a larger organization, you then don't allow people to see the messy parts, which are a fundamental integral part of the process, right? And because nothing is clean, right? It's never, like you said, a clean A to B to C to D type situation. There are roadblocks along the way. There are detours. There are issues. There is real peril potentially along the way. And if your team is not seeing that, because you're in your head, again, you're telling yourself this aspirational story about yourself and the organization or the product or whatever it is you're running or leading, you miss those pieces where, again, it creates a little bit of a vacuum ultimately. And then, well, vacuums are, well, you always say nature abhors a vacuum, and it's true.
Just kidding. And people will fill in the vacuum. I mean, human nature and just the way brains work, and you will fill in, because our brains naturally want to think in terms of stories and make meaning out of situations. If you leave narrative gaps, your audience will fill it in. It's not an if they'll fill it in, they will fill it in. And for the most part, especially depending on what type of company or situation we're talking about, they're probably not going to fill, they're at minimum not going to fill it in the way you would probably want them to fill it in. And with a lot of the feelings that people have about larger entities, institutions, really lack of trust in things these days, chances are people are going to fill in narrative gaps in a way that is completely uncharitable to you, or will attribute malice or something. So if you have iterated because you realized that the product that you started with was actually not going to meet a need, that's a great story to tell. That I thought we needed to do this, and then I listened to my potential customers or my team, who actually are the people that are going to be interacting with said product or said, service or business. And I pivoted. That's a great story to tell. That shows like that. Implicit in that story is that you listen. Implicit in that story is it's not about what you want. It's actually about serving the people. Like, there is so much good that people will take away from a story like that versus, oh no, I don't have a clean linear story to tell. I can't just say I went from A to B and it was magically successful and I was brilliant from day one.
Yeah. Yeah. And the in-between can feel very messy and disorganized. I mean, and so then that creates frustration on your team. It can create all sorts of, diminished morale, issues like that. So, and even if it's not like you're listening to your team and customers, like there's a world in which, like, I don't know, you founded a company, you have all these great ideas, and then one day you're taking a walk or, up in the middle of the night or taking a shower, and suddenly one of those thoughts pops into your head and it's like, oh, it clicked. You still have to fill people in on like why it is that you're moving in a different direction. Otherwise they're not going to, they're going to lose the plot. And when they lose, so like a story really is a strategic roadmap. And if you don't have that story, really what it is just a bunch of disorganized data points that is not going to make sense to anyone in particular.
Especially as you start to scale. It's one thing to maybe be a little bit more freewheeling when you can get everybody in a room and you're in a startup type environment or a small campaign, or like you said, Matt, when you're a solo person. But as you start to scale and get bigger, it's impossible and completely counterproductive to be over your team's shoulder every 2 seconds, making sure they're following the directions or keeping up with it. And so without that strategic map, people, especially if you have highly motivated people, they're going to figure out a way to get it done with the information you've provided them. So it's not necessarily even that they're not being good employees or they're not listening or they're not necessarily being given that strategic roadmap and support to understand where it is that the company or the entity is going at this point. And so it's incredibly valuable to be looking at again, this sense of authorship, like what story, what strategic plan are you attempting to execute with this team? And is it the most current version?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really hard to get into that mindset as we're thinking through all of the things. I mean, thinking about all the things that happen again between our ears on any given day, and that the people external to ourselves do not see. So it's a tough process, and I think that leads to all sorts of other leadership tendencies too. Because as we're thinking about leaders, right? People look to leaders not necessarily to dictate to them, but they do want some guidance. They want the vision. They want the vision, right? They want to understand again why it is they're heading in the direction that they're heading in. So as a leader, it's great to feel like you are approaching things with some humility, right? And I think humility is important. And I think humility is actually connected a lot to this idea of curiosity that we talk about, where it's like, the humility enough to continue to interrogate your ideas and your thoughts and your preconceived notions about certain things and go through that process. What humility isn't, though, is completely swearing off your responsibility and your role to, again, communicate the strategic roadmap, but then also highlight the things that are working really well. And so it's not, silence isn't just humility, right? I mean, that's something that you were talking about before. Yeah,
this idea, and we mentioned so we're not coming at you like, oh, we have everything figured out. This is like what we're wrestling with and what we're wrestling with clients. This idea that, again, there's a vacuum. So if there's silence, it's absence. It's the absence of your story. It's the absence of the proof that you executed what you committed to executing. So that's another place where if you're somebody who's intrinsically motivated, if you're somebody who by nature is a more humble, team-oriented person, it can feel deeply uncomfortable, in the words of that creator and other places, like to show the receipts, to basically feel like you're tooting your own horn. But it does create a gap. We saw this a lot to get political, with the Biden administration, that there was all of this awesome stuff that they were doing, but people didn't know about it. And so what got filled in that place was like, well, they didn't do anything. Like, I don't know what they're doing. And it is deeply uncomfortable for a lot of leaders and individuals. It feels like, well, if I tell people what I'm doing and I'm highlighting my accomplishments, I'm bragging. And we want to, again, say this to ourselves and to the people listening, that there is a difference between tooting your own horn to inflate your ego or to fill in some insecurity and showing people that you actually did what you said you were going to do. We told you we were going to do this. We saw and we did. And we're going to take a moment to highlight that, because that helps deepen the trust with the people that you have this relationship with, whether it's your customers, whether it's your team, whether it's your constituents. We told you we were going to do it and we did. And maybe it looks a little different, or here's kind of what we encountered. Again, this is another opportunity to share the journey, and especially if it looks a little different than maybe people thought. But it is not bragging to deepen trust with people by saying, when we see something and tell you we're going to do it, we got it done. Thank you for your faith in us. Good news, we did it. Now we're on to something else, or here's what we learned from this, and now we're we need a part 2 of this, or a part 20. But it's not bragging to show that you've honored your commitment.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that you mentioned part 2. I think one of the things, again, that leaders tend to underestimate, and you hit the nail on the head perfectly with this idea of trust. Trust is absolutely essential to getting anything done, whether it's in the public sphere or among your team in private enterprise and a nonprofit organization. You need to have and cultivate that trust. The problem is, in today's attention economy, people's attention is torn between a million different things. Even people who work for you, people who are paying a lot of attention to what you are doing. So to use, the example of the Biden administration, it's hard, right? Like, you have to acknowledge that it is really hard to capture attention in the way that you need to highlight your accomplishments. And it is often deeply uncomfortable for leaders to engage in nauseating repetition. Like, that's really what it is nauseating repetition. So it's not enough to just highlight one policy victory or one milestone, for example, in a company. You have to repeat it over and over and over again for people to actually get it, because they'll hear it the first time and then it'll just flow out of their minds because it's not the primary thing that you're paying attention to, right? Like I don't think outside of very specific places in the United States that have drinking water quality crises that are very acute, and you have to drive to a depot every day and pick up bottles of water because your drinking water is toxic. You're not thinking about your drinking water. However, I think everyone would agree that drinking water quality is important. We all want clean drinking water. And so when you pass a policy, for example, to pull a lot of lead pipes out of the ground and replace them with pipes that will deliver that clean drinking water for you, that's a good thing. But you're not thinking about it every day, unless, again, you're facing a crisis. So the thing is, you have to repeat it to the point where it almost seems comical that you're repeating it that much. So you could hold the one press conference, say, oh, we're doing this, and then a week later, people are going to forget about it, unless you're saying, like, hey, and look, on this street, we're pulling lead pipes out here. Look, on this street, we're pulling lead pipes out here. So it's the repetition is a hugely important piece of the puzzle that I think often goes missing because it's deeply uncomfortable for people to do.
Yeah. And you're trying to get, having been in government, it feels like you have almost too much time sometimes, in the sense of, like, things take too much time because there are, appropriate checks and balances and public processes. And so in some ways, things do end up taking longer, also because you're doing like 90 things at once. Like, you can't be like, oh, we're not going to run this program while we stop and do this other thing, and you can't clone yourself. So, time's a fascinating thing, but there also is this sense, and the former governor, current mayor John Carney told this story about how some other elected official was like, oh, I keep a clock on my desk to remind me that, like, my term only has a certain amount of time in it, and when it's up, I'm out. And so there is this pressure to do a bunch of stuff, and it can feel like, oh my God, are we talking about this again? We need to move on to the other thing. The challenge is, like you said, and we were talking about, if you don't have people's trust and there's not a sense that you are somebody to be believed, people aren't good. It's like, but if you move on to the next thing without really verifying that the thing that you promised you got done, you're missing these opportunities for people to feel like they correctly put their trust in you. And so it's better, at least kind of what we're seeing from the people and places that are doing this successfully. It's better to almost go a little slower at first and really kind of beat the drum on, we saw this, we told you we were going to fix it, and we fixed it, and here it is here, and how we fixed it, and we fixed it over here, and we did this, like you said, having tons of different events to establish that trust. And then maybe you can let off the gas a little bit on future efforts and not necessarily need to do, that much showing and telling. But it's hard because they'll, again, like we will talk about this with clients. Sometimes you need the theater. People want to see a bit of the show and tell in the theater. You don't want to be all show and tell such that people go, well, that seemed fake. That was just that was a feel good production about a nothing issue. Like, you don't want to just have, again, like the giant scissors everywhere and people never see a building actually being built. But saying, oh, well, that feels performative to make a cool graphic, or it feels performative to make a video about what we accomplished, it, again, misses that opportunity to build trust. And it also, in a previous role, I had a boss that was very like, oh, I don't want to do this. And I tried to impress upon this person that this mattered to the team. Like, this was an accomplishment that the team was really proud of. And so maybe why the leader is like, oh, this feels, self-serving to go out and talk about this, it felt to the team like their work wasn't worthy of celebrating. Like, they did all this, they sacrificed, they did overtime and weekends and all this stuff, and it didn't matter. Like, no one actually saw it. And so I would challenge people too, especially if you were in charge of a team and maybe you're not comfortable with doing stuff like this, to think about the impact that it has on your team to not call out these successes. So not just about the customers, but like the people you work with and are in charge of. Is this missing an opportunity to acknowledge their work and to give them credit, especially if you're in some of these roles that are kind of thankless and there's a lot of incoming nastiness? A moment in the spotlight to be like, look at the cool work they're doing, can go a long way.
It absolutely does go a long way. And this is another interesting feature. And the story that you just told is illustrative of this, where there's almost this separation of the work and then talking about the work for whatever reason. And I think you could probably have gotten away with that for a while, like a while back, right? You could do the majority of your work, especially in the public domain, when we're talking about policy and politics, like you probably could get a lot done quietly behind closed doors, because there was, I think, more of a consensus among the people who are governing this country and governing various states of the policy regime that we all wanted to see, right? So it's sort of like that New Deal coalition that carried through till about, Reagan, right? Not to get too political, but like, so then after that though, as the 24-hour news coverage started to pop up, you needed to fill those minutes, that airspace with more content. And then you had the internet roll around, and then you had social media roll around, and you need to fill that with more content. And then suddenly, again, attention is fractured, right? So that separation between the work and communicating the work has created a lot of challenges for folks. And I think the other thing then to think about is how to structure teams and that communications function within storytelling function within your team. And I think in a lot of ways, for a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders, that's often been a huge afterthought. It's we have our core executive team, and then we bring the communications people and the storytelling crew in afterwards, after we figure it all out, when those things really do need to work hand in hand, because you do need people to pay attention in order to actually execute on those strategies. So that's an interesting feature of all of this, of how those two things have become separated, like putting in the work and then talking about the work, when in reality, again, you need to your point, you need that trust in order to execute. So you need to talk about it in a way that's and in a way that makes people feel like you're delivering, because it's, again, people, and this is no fault of anyone's own, because there's so much to pay attention to.
There's so much to pay attention to, and just kind of zone out on if you.
It is overwhelming.
It is overwhelming.
It is very overwhelming, right? So like that's the other thing too, is it's probably not great from a cognitive and emotional perspective that we have access to as much information. Like we are hyper aware of things that are happening across the globe. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think there's some downsides that come with that we never would have had access to or awareness of previously. And so we have more of a blow by blow picture of exactly what's happening in the world. I mean, for the most part, right? There's still stuff that we don't necessarily see, but a lot of this stuff plays out in broad daylight now. Whereas previously it didn't, right? You couldn't just pick up your phone and Google something or capture information, or look up information in the way that we can today. So I think, again, it creates real peril for leaders when you don't have that function sitting at the table of the storytelling. Like, how do we cultivate that trust and the buy-in for these things, and then continue to nurture that buy-in? Like, you can't just create it and then let it go. So.
Well, and it's funny because as you're talking, I'm thinking about all the people that are like, get ready with me. And like you said, this sense of influencers and people showing obviously they're not showing every step, but they're allowing that peek behind the curtain. And so as we were talking about before, silence equals absence. If you're not, like you said, you have this separation between the work and talking about the work, people will assume you're not doing work. I mean, that's, again, when you kind of pull all of these threads together into a tapestry: institutional distrust, a sense of, this day and age of information equals more transparency, and I want to actually see what people are doing. And then if you were absent from that space, people are more likely to assume, well, they're just not doing anything. Because if they were doing something, they'd be talking about it. If I were doing something, I'd be talking about it. So clearly they're not doing anything because they're not talking about it. They're not sitting there saying, oh my gosh, this person's really worried that they don't have enough time to get everything done. So they're just buckling down. And there's a way to tell that story too. You can film behind the scenes of everybody busy at work. Like, the cool thing about the age we live in now is there's a lot more tools at our hands, at our fingertips to tell stories. But I completely agree with you that there is now so much more pressure and, frankly, sort of savaging of people that are not availing themselves of these tools and not bringing their audiences along with them.
Yeah. I mean, your audience is not going to leave you alone to just do.
Yeah, to just assume like, oh, I guess good luck out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the last piece that we wanted to talk about, which is also really important, and like you said, the idea of living in your head, is this sense of, what story are we telling ourselves about ourselves, which is a really important part of this, because a lot of times the stories that we're telling ourselves are almost running in the background as like secret kind of programming that are directly impacting how we're interacting with the world, but we're not conscious of it. So, for example, if you think you're somebody that people don't take seriously, you may go into a meeting and maybe act a little more aggressively, or, act in a way that someone would be like, what are you talking about? You're this, that, and the other, but you have this, this script running in the background that says, oh, people don't take me seriously, so I have to do this. Or, oh, well, I can't be taken seriously unless I have a PhD in something, or I've got to take a course. Like, there's just so many things that, kind of fear programming that's kind of bubbling or, under the surface.
Yeah, and like you said, factors into how you present in the theater of some of this. And it's really hard to break out of that. I mean, it literally is a script, right? Where again, you're reading a treatment for a play or a television show or a movie, and there's a whole paragraph sort of developing that character. Like, who are you? What do you feel? How do you move through the world? We all have that. Like, that's all in us, and when we all do tell ourselves that story, whatever that's, or the number of different stories about ourselves on any given day, that is running, like you said, in the background, kind of dictating the flow of things sometimes. So being aware of that, I think, is hugely important. And then continue, again, we keep coming back to curiosity, but maintaining curiosity about why it is that's the story that we're telling ourselves, and is it true or is it not? And sometimes we can't get to the truth, right? Like, I think that's like the reality of things. Like, but we can get closer to. We are able to step back, zoom out, and try to observe the world around us, and really, again, interrogate whether or not we feel like what we feel like people are experiencing as, if that is that exactly how people actually experience us. So I think that's the that's a hard thing to do, but absolutely worth doing, because like you said, we're all these sort of characters, and all the world is a stage, and we are but players.
I know. It is wild because one of the pieces I got to participate on, there's this wonderful organization called Milbank Memorial Fund, and they work with state leaders and do programs like an emerging leaders program and fellowships. And so Dr. Rich Callahan is one of I think he might be the lead consultant professor who supports a lot of these cohorts, not on staff, but I mean, it's so identified with Milbank and their leadership programs. But one of the best pieces of leadership advice I've ever received was as part of this emerging leaders program with Dr. Callahan. And he said, your ability to succeed as a leader is in direct proportion to what you're willing to let go of from your previous roles. And to me, that goes to this idea of the stories you're telling yourself. Because if you're telling yourself, well, I'm the person that owns the projects, or I'm the person that figures everything out. Well, when you go to these new roles, one, if it's a new role, you're probably going to be learning something. You're probably not, most people, when they start out something new, have that messy, stumbly baby deer sort of face planting around, at least feels that way. Mm-hmm. And so this sense of, if you are so wedded to a version of yourself as being supremely competent all the time, that's going to feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. It might push you to do things and act in a way that is actually not conducive. If you are in a new leadership role, again, curiosity, figuring out, like, what does the team that I'm working with, what do my customers, what do people need from this role right now? Mm-hmm. Being willing to listen and learn and figure out, me, like, you were hired in this position for a reason. So, be willing to assume that even if you feel like a baby deer face planning, you probably are bringing skills to this position, but be willing to grow and learn and listen. But if you were, death gripping this story that I always know the right thing and I'm the one that delivers on the project, you're probably not, to Dr. Callahan's point, leaving pieces of your old work behind and growing into your new position.
Yeah, that's great advice.
It's amazing advice.
Wish someone would have told me that much earlier in my career.
Yeah, but, I'm not gonna say I've lived it all the time, but I have constantly, especially in leadership positions, reminded myself of that. It's like, I'm not the person that does this anymore. I actually have somebody on my team that does it. And if I'm constantly parachuting in and clinging to those pieces of my previous role, one, back to what we were talking about, the aspiration versus action. I may say that I trust this person and that this person is, the legislative director, just for instance. But if I'm doing all the lobbying and I'm keeping a close hold on the relationships and I'm acting as if I'm the legislative director, even though I've now moved up to be like a chief of staff, I'm signaling with my actions that I actually don't trust that person. And that person's not really the legislative director. I'm both the chief of staff and the legislative director because I'm not willing to let go of those previous skills and those relationships and those things that made me successful as a legislative director.
Yeah. And what else aren't you paying attention to as a result of that?
Exactly. Because you're essentially trying to do two jobs.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well,
yeah,
we appreciate you all joining us for another duo episode here of Expect Chaos. So as always, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, leave us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
Subscribe on Substack. This is primarily where we live. Feel free to follow us on Instagram, all the places. But yeah, we would love, and if this was helpful to you, we'd appreciate if you would forward to someone else. But yeah, think about where we'll leave you with, we like to curiosity questions. Think about where in your life maybe you're not fully being the author of your own story, either because you're running an old script and not living in the now, or because your actions aren't actually telling the story you want. Or, we would challenge you, humble servant leader types, where are you not celebrating? Even if it feels like a small win, where are you not celebrating where you've actually accomplished and delivered on something that you said you would? And we would challenge you to do any of those things in between now and our next episode or forever.
All right. And feel free to rate us if you have any.
Yeah,
any
we would
thoughts on
love to hear that.
We'd be happy to do a mailbag episode.
Oh, that would be so fun.
Send in your questions or thoughts on this. And that is where we will leave you today. So again, thank you very much for tuning in.
Emmy says bye as well.
Big thank you to Emmy for crashing the party. And
anything, Emmy?
Should breathe.
Emmy doesn't. Yeah, she's just going to breathe heavily into the microphone. Don't make it creepy.
There might be an audience out there for dogs breathing. But anyway, that's not our thing. So
at least not yet. You never know.
Yeah. Talk about iterating, right?
Yeah. I mean, if the audience wants it, I guess we could find an episode of Emmy deep breathing into the microphone.
Well, thanks a lot, Emmy.
All right. Thanks everyone. Bye.